Transformed thinking becomes emotionally dependent on familiarity, rigid tradition, comfort zones, and hierarchy. Reforms, therefore, require adaptability. To survive a reform, one must renew their mind. You must let go of old paradigms, embrace growth, but the endangered thought species resists transformation because transformation feels like death to ego. Growth requires uncertainty. So instead of evolving, it clings to outdated patterns. Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Gathoni. This is the Renewed Mind with Kathy. This is the channel where we renew our minds and our lives gets transformed. If you're new to this episode or even to this channel, feel free to look at the previous episodes that we have already covered. Season 1, we are in Season 2, and now this is episode 4. Last episode, we looked at the invincible mind, where we learned what it means to have an invincible mind. This episode, we shall be looking into yet again another interesting topic, which is themed the endangered thought species. Grab a cup of coffee, grab your notebook and your pen as we journey through the mind-engaging journey. Karibu sana. So this episode, we're going to be talking about the endangered thought species. The promised land is not off, your mind is. Meaning, your mental capacity is incompatible with the promise. An endangered thought species is a conformed mind that will never enter the promised land. The concept of an endangered thought species can be understood as a pattern of thinking that is slowly dying, becoming obsolete, or unable to survive in the reality of growth, transformation, or destiny. Spiritually and psychologically, the phrase suggests that this is a mindset that cannot evolve into the next level of purpose, freedom, or even consciousness. That certain ways of thinking are incompatible with the higher dimensions of life, purpose, or even transformation. An endangered thought species is a limiting, fear-based, inherited, or conditioned way of thinking that cannot survive in the environment of spiritual growth, freedom, vision, or even the promise. It is endangered because it belongs to an old reality or an old system. It cannot adapt to revelation. It eventually collapses under the demands of transformation. It cannot hold new wine. The phrase conformed mind echoes from the biblical perspective or from the biblical scene where we usually draw the foundation of this YouTube channel or this channel, which is Romans 12:2, which says, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." A conformed mind is shaped entirely by external systems. It is controlled by fear, tradition, survival, or even limiting beliefs. It is unable to imagine beyond its conditioning. It thinks only within past experiences, inherited belief systems, visible limitations. Why such a mind cannot enter the promised land is because the promised land is not only a physical destination. Spiritually, it symbolizes expansion, freedom, destiny, abundance, higher consciousness, divine fulfillment. But the tragedy is people can leave bondage physically while still carrying bondage mentally. This is what happened with Moses and the Israelites. Egypt left their bodies, but not their minds. Their minds remained in Egypt. Though they were freed from slavery, they still thought like slaves, feared uncertainty, preferred familiarity, or rather, they preferred the familiar bondage over unknown freedom. Every challenge made them want to return backward, doubt God, reject transformation, and the promised land required a different kind of a mindset. The promised land required faith over fear, vision over memory, trust over survival mentality. But the conformed mind could not sustain that level of thinking. That generation died in the wilderness, not because the promise failed, but because their mentality was incompatible with the promise. So, what exactly does an endangered thought species entail? Number one, survival based thinking. It is always asking, what if I fail? What if I lose? What is the safest way to go about this whole thing? But it never thinks about what could be possible. What is God calling me towards? Number two, it is comfortable in the familiar bondage, prefers painful familiarity over transformative uncertainty. Freedom feels threatening because it requires responsibility and growth. Number three, fear of the unknown or fear of expansion. A conformed mind becomes uncomfortable with vision, with change, with growth, with deeper revelation, and it attacks what it cannot comprehend. Number four, external dependence. It constantly is in need of validation from systems, validation from crowds, tradition or history, authority, and it cannot stand independently in conviction. Number five, it is unable or it is unflexible or inflexible to new ideologies or systems. It repeats inherited patterns instead of transforming them, breeding stagnation and retrogressive mindsets. Using the word endangered species in this concept, species implies a living system of thought. It is a mindset ecosystem, something that reproduces itself across generations. For example, fear can be generational. A poverty mentality can be inherited. Oppression can reproduce itself psychologically. Therefore, an endangered thought species is therefore a dying mental system that cannot survive where there is transformation occurring. The wilderness is not just geographical, but a psychological transition. It was the death place of old mindsets, systems, structures, and old wineskins. Before entering the promise, slave thinking had to die. Fearful thinking had to die. Dependence thinking had to die. Because a new territory or divine assignment requires new consciousness. The greatest barrier to destiny is often not external enemies, but internal conformity. A person may pray for opportunity, for purpose, for expansion, for growth, while still thinking in ways designed only for survival. This is dangerous because an inheritance given to a prodigal mind will be squandered. And God is not in the business of wasting resources. Every new dimension of life demands the extinction of an old pattern of thinking. This is why transformation always feels like loss before it feels like growth. Because part of you is dying, your old identity, your old limitations, your old conformity, your old patterns of thinking. Therefore, an endangered thought species is an outdated, fear-conditioned, conformity-driven mindset that cannot survive or function in the environment of spiritual transformation and divine promise. A conformed mind cannot enter the promised land because destiny requires renewed consciousness. An endangered thought species cannot survive revival, it cannot survive reforms, it cannot survive thy kingdom come, because all this is an invasion of a higher order of reality, and an outdated consciousness cannot function in a transformed environment. Revival awakens what was asleep. Reforms confront and restructures what is corrupted and misaligned. Thy kingdom come establishes divine order over human systems. And each of these threatens minds that are built on fear, control, stagnation, conformity, and survival consciousness. Revival is not merely an emotional excitement of large gatherings. True revival is the resurrection of the righteousness consciousness, the consciousness that was lost back in the Garden of Eden. It awakens people to truth, identity, purpose, spiritual authority, hunger for transformation. The conformed mind fears awakening because an endangered thought species survives through passivity, numbness, inherited thinking, unquestioned systems. Revival disrupts all this because once people are awakened, they begin to question bondage. They stop normalizing dysfunction. They seek authenticity over performance and ritual. Revival exposes dead thinking. Revival is light entering darkness. Mentalities built on fear, on pride, manipulation, religious performance, dependency become exposed and uncomfortable. This is why revival often creates resistance among the people, even in religious systems. Because revival threatens systems that depend on spiritually asleep people. Reform is deeper than inspiration. Reform says what has become distorted must be rebuilt correctly. Therefore, reforms challenge broken structures, unhealthy traditions, corrupted systems, inherited dysfunction. The endangered thought species is attached to old structures. Conformed thinking becomes emotionally dependent on familiarity, rigid tradition, comfort zones, and hierarchy. Reforms, therefore, require adaptability. To survive a reform, one must renew their mind. You must let go of old paradigms, embrace growth, but the endangered thought species resists transformation because transformation feels like death to ego. Growth requires uncertainty. So instead of evolving, it clings to outdated patterns. Thy kingdom come is not merely about heaven after death. It means the rule, the culture, the order, and the reality of God invading earthly systems. The kingdom confronts false power, injustice systems, fear, spiritual blindness, inner bondage. The kingdom requires a different consciousness. Jesus constantly taught in ways that disrupted old mentalities, which threatened religious and political systems, because a kingdom mindset produces free people, and liberated people are difficult to control. The kingdom operates through revelation, through expansion, spiritual maturity, truth, renewal of the mind. But the endangered thought species depends on limitation, fear, conformity, and survival identity. These two cannot coexist because the scripture says in the book of Corinthians, do not be unequally bound together with unbelievers. Do not make mismatched alliances with them, inconsistent with your faith. For what partnership can righteousness have with lawlessness? Or what fellowship can light have with darkness? What harmony can there be between Christ and Belial or Satan? Or what does a believer have in common with an unbeliever? Throughout Scripture, whenever God moved, Pharaoh resisted liberation. Wilderness minds resisted the promise. Religious elites resisted Christ. Old wineskins resisted new wine. Why? Because every move of God threatens minds built from previous season. Jesus said, new wine cannot be poured into old wineskins. Spiritually, this means new revelation requires a renewed capacity. Old mental frameworks cannot contain living truth. The endangered thought species breaks under the pressure of transformation because it was never designed for expansion, but to serve a specific season. Revival, reforms, and the kingdom consciousness all require responsibility, growth, inner change, surrender of ego, and a renewed identity. But conformed minds, they prefer certainty, predictability, external control, and inherited beliefs. So when transformation begins, they often resist, fear, attack, withdraw, or even mock. Not because revival is wrong, but because transformation threatens their psychological survival. God often has to separate people from old mental environments before bringing them to the promised land. Why? Because environments respond through patterns. An endangered thought species cannot survive revival or reforms or thy kingdom come, because these realities introduce a higher truth, an awakened consciousness, divine order, transformational growth, and minds built on conformity, fear, and limitation cannot function where truth is awakening people, or where systems are being reformed, and where the kingdom demands an internal or inner renewal. So are you an endangered thought species? Friends, Renewed Mind family, this episode has come out at a time where it is time for people to embrace and to accept the renewal of the mind. You must renew, or you must, it's either you renew your mind or you conform to the patterns of this world. And now we know that a conformed mind is an endangered thought species. Thank you so much for tuning in this episode. I really appreciate your time. I hope you're learning something. I hope you're really enjoying yourself. I can't wait to see you again in the next episode and in the next episode. And if you have not yet subscribed to this channel, please do subscribe. Please do share. If this content is inspiring you and it's helping you, share this content, like, and also remember that the journey of being or of having a renewed mind begins at Calvary. This is where we say you confess with your mouth and believe in your heart that Jesus Christ is Lord. Thank you once again. Until next time, keep your mind renewed. Shalom.